A woman dressed as a trainee is humiliated in the company she inherited from her father, but the next day she leaves everyone with their mouths wide open. Addison Blackwood stared out the window of her penthouse apartment in Oak Ridge, California, her manicured fingers wrapped around a steaming cup of coffee. The early morning sun cast a golden glow over the city, but Addison couldn't shake the heavy weight that had settled in her chest. It had been 3 days since she'd received the news of her father's passing, and the world still felt off-kilter. At 35, Addison had built a life for herself outside of her family's shadow. She'd pursued a career in art curation, distancing herself from the corporate world that had consumed her father's life. But now, with his death, she found herself thrust back into a world she'd long ago left behind. A sharp knock at the door jolted her from her reverie. Setting down her coffee, Addison crossed the room, her silk robe rustling softly. She opened the door to find Harrison Wells, her father's longtime lawyer and friend, standing in the hallway. "Good morning, Addison," Harrison said, his voice somber. "May I come in?" Addison nodded, stepping aside to let him enter. "Of course, Harrison, can I get you anything? Coffee?" Harrison shook his head, his salt and pepper hair catching the light. "No, thank you. I'm here on official business, I'm afraid." They settled in the living room. Addison perched on the edge of the sofa while Harrison took a seat in the armchair across from her. He opened his briefcase and pulled out a thick envelope. "As you know, your father's will reading is scheduled for later this week," Harrison began. "However, there's a matter that needs to be addressed immediately." He handed the envelope to Addison. "Your father left specific instructions for you, separate from the main will." With trembling hands, Addison opened the envelope and began to read. As her eyes scanned the pages, her brow furrowed and her mouth fell open in disbelief. This can't be right," she stammered, looking up at Harrison. "He wants me to work at Blackwood Industries for a month, as an intern." Harrison nodded solemnly. "Your father was very clear about this condition. Before you can take control of the company, you must spend 1 month working there in a low-profile position without revealing your identity to anyone." Addison stood up abruptly, pacing the room. "But why? I've spent years building my own life, my own career. I can't just drop everything and play pretend for a month." "I understand your frustration, Addison," Harrison said gently. "But your father believed this experience would be invaluable for you. He wanted you to see the company from the ground up, to understand its inner workings before you take the reins." Addison sank back onto the sofa, her mind reeling. She'd always had a complicated relationship with her father, Gregory Blackwood. He'd been a titan of industry, building Blackwood Industries from the ground up into a multinational corporation. But in doing so, he'd often neglected his family, leaving Addison to forge her own path. "What happens if I refuse?" she asked, though she already knew the answer. Harrison's expression was grave. "Then control of the company would pass to the board of directors. Your father was adamant about this condition, Addison. He believed it was crucial for the future of Blackwood Industries." Addison closed her eyes, taking a deep breath. She thought of her father, of the complex man he'd been, driven, ambitious, but also capable of surprising moments of insight. Perhaps this was his final lesson to her, his way of bridging the gap between them, even after his death. "All right," she said, finally opening her eyes. "I'll do it, but I have conditions of my own. I want to choose my position, and I want your help in creating a foolproof cover identity." Harrison nodded, a small smile tugging at his lips. "I think we can arrange that. Your father would be proud, Addison. He always said you had his spirit." As Harrison left, Addison returned to the window, gazing out at the city that housed Blackwood Industries' headquarters. In just a few days, she'd be walking through those doors, not as Addison Blackwood, heiress and art curator, but as someone entirely new. Little did she know, this month-long charade would change not only her life, but the lives of everyone at Blackwood Industries in ways she could never have imagined. 1 week later, Addison stood in front of her full-length mirror, barely recognizing the woman staring back at her. Gone were her designer clothes and perfectly styled hair. Instead, she wore a simple blouse and pencil skirt, her long auburn hair pulled back into a modest ponytail. She'd even swapped her contact lenses for a pair of thick-rimmed glasses, completing her transformation into Alison Brooks, the new marketing intern at Blackwood Industries. With a deep breath, Addison, now Allison, grabbed her bag, and headed out the door of the small studio apartment she'd rented for the month. She'd insisted on fully immersing herself in the role, right down to living in a more modest part of town. As she approached the towering glass edifice of Blackwood Industries, Alison felt a flutter of nerves in her stomach. She'd visited this building countless times as a child, but never like this, never as just another face in the crowd. At the reception desk, she was greeted by a peppy young woman with a bright smile. "Good morning. You must be Alison Brooks. I'm Mia from HR. Welcome to Blackwood Industries." Alison smiled back, trying to channel the nervousness she'd feel if this truly were her first day at a new job. "Thank you, Mia. I'm excited to be here." Mia led her through a whirlwind orientation, showing her around the marketing department and introducing her to a dizzying array of people. Alison tried to absorb it all, noting the mix of enthusiasm and weariness on her new colleagues' faces. Finally, Mia brought her to a small cubicle. "And this is your home for the next month. Your supervisor, Ethan, should be here soon to get you started on your first project." As Mia bustled away, Alison sank into her chair, taking in the stark difference between this tiny workspace and her father's palatial corner office on the top floor. She was just booting up her computer when a shadow fell across her desk. "Alison Brooks?" a deep voice asked. She looked up to see a man in his early 40s with kind brown eyes and a neatly trimmed beard. He wore a crisp button-down shirt with the sleeves rolled up, exuding an air of casual competence. "Yes, that's me," Alison replied, standing to shake his hand. "Ethan Reeves," he introduced himself with a warm smile. "I'll be your supervisor during your internship. Welcome to the team." Over the next few hours, Ethan walked Alison through her first assignment, a market research project for a new product line. As they worked, Alison found herself impressed by Ethan's knowledge and his patient teaching style. She also couldn't help but notice the way his eyes crinkled when he smiled, or how his hand occasionally brushed against hers as he pointed out something on her computer screen. As lunchtime approached, Ethan invited Alison to join him and some of the other team members in the break room. It was there that she got her first glimpse of the underlying tensions within the company. "Did you hear about the latest budget cuts?" a woman named Tessa whispered as they ate. "I heard Marcus Holloway is slashing the RD department again." Alison's ears perked up at the mention of Marcus Holloway, the current CEO of Blackwood Industries. She'd met him a few times at company events, but had never interacted with him in a professional capacity. Ethan frowned, his forehead creasing with concern. "That's the third time this year. How are we supposed to stay competitive if we're not investing in innovation?" "You know Marcus," another colleague, James, chimed in bitterly. "All he cares about is short-term profits and keeping the shareholders happy. Never mind that we're running our best people into the ground." Alison listened intently, shocked by what she was hearing. This wasn't the company her father had built, the one he'd spoken of with such pride. What had happened in the years since she distanced herself from Blackwood Industries? As the day wore on, Alison found herself observing everything with new eyes. She noticed the tired slump of shoulders, the hushed conversations that stopped abruptly when supervisors walked by, the forced smiles in the face of impossible deadlines. By the time she left the office that evening, Alison's head was spinning. She'd come into this charade expecting it to be a formality, a hoop to jump through before claiming her inheritance. Instead, she found herself face to face with a company in crisis, one that bore little resemblance to the thriving enterprise her father had lovingly built. As she walked to her temporary apartment, Alison made a decision. She wouldn't just coast through this month playing a role. She would use this opportunity to truly understand what was happening at Blackwood Industries, and maybe, just maybe, find a way to set things right. Little did she know, this decision would set in motion a chain of events that would change not only her life, but the lives of everyone at Blackwood Industries, in ways she could never have imagined. As the days turned into weeks, Alison found herself settling into a routine at Blackwood Industries. She threw herself into her work, impressing Ethan and her colleagues with her dedication and quick learning. But behind her eager intern facade, Addison's mind was constantly whirring, piecing together the puzzle of what had gone wrong with her father's company. It was during her third week that Alison stumbled upon a pivotal piece of information. She was working late one evening, the office nearly deserted, when she overheard raised voices coming from a nearby conference room. Curiosity piqued. Allison crept closer, recognizing the voices of Marcus Holloway and Vivian Crest, the CFO. "We can't keep this up, Marcus," Vivian was saying, her voice tight with stress. "The numbers don't lie. If we continue on this path, we'll be in serious trouble within a year." Marcus's response was dismissive. "You worry too much, Vivian. The shareholders are happy, and that's what matters. We'll figure out the rest as we go." "But at what cost?" Vivian pressed. "We're losing our best talent, morale is at an all-time low, and our competitors are outpacing us in innovation. This isn't what Gregory would have wanted for the company." There was a sharp sound, a hand slamming on a table. "Gregory is gone," Marcus snapped. "I'm in charge now, and I'll run this company as I see fit. If you can't get on board, Vivian, perhaps it's time we discussed your future here." Allison's heart raced as she hurried back to her desk, her mind reeling from what she'd overheard. It was worse than she'd thought. Marcus Holloway wasn't just mismanaging the company. He was running it into the ground, all while threatening anyone who dared to speak up. The next day, Allison found herself in the break room with Ethan, Tessa, and a few other colleagues. As they chatted, she carefully steered the conversation towards the company's current state. "I've noticed things seem a bit tense around here," she ventured. "Is that normal?" The group exchanged glances before Tessa spoke up. "It didn't used to be like this. Blackwood Industries was once a great place to work. But ever since Marcus Holloway took over as CEO, he's been cutting corners everywhere," James added, his voice low. "Slashing budgets, increasing workloads, ignoring employee concerns. It's like he only cares about short-term profits, not the long-term health of the company." Ethan nodded, a sad look in his eyes. Gregory Blackwood, the founder, he had a vision. He believed in investing in people, in innovation. But Marcus, he's dismantling everything Gregory built, piece by piece. Allison felt a surge of emotion at hearing her father spoken of with such reverence. She wanted to reveal herself right then and there, to promise these good people that she would make things right. But she held back, knowing she needed more information, more evidence before she could act. Over the next few days, Allison began to form alliances, carefully feeling out which employees might be willing to help her gather evidence against Marcus. She found unexpected allies in Vivian Crest, the CFO she'd overheard arguing with Marcus, and in Raj Patel, a brilliant software engineer who'd been with the company since its early days. Together, they began to compile a dossier of Marcus's misdeeds, the budget cuts that had crippled vital departments, the corners cut in product development that had led to a decline in quality, the talented employees who'd been driven away by toxic management practices. As the end of her month-long stint approached, Allison felt the weight of responsibility settling on her shoulders. She knew that when she revealed her true identity, she would be changing not just her own life, but the lives of everyone at Blackwood Industries. One evening, as she was preparing to leave the office, Ethan caught up with her at the elevator. "Allison," he said, a hint of nervousness in his voice, "I was wondering if you'd like to grab dinner sometime, to celebrate the end of your internship." Allison felt a flutter in her stomach that had nothing to do with her secret mission. Over the past few weeks, she'd grown increasingly drawn to Ethan. His kindness, his integrity, the passion he still held for his work despite the challenges. "I'd love to," she found herself saying, even as a voice in the back of her mind warned her about the complications this could bring. As she rode the elevator down, Allison's mind was a whirlwind of thoughts. In just a few days, she would be revealing her true identity, confronting Marcus Holloway, and taking control of Blackwood Industries. And now there was Ethan to consider. Ethan, who thought he was asking out a simple intern, not the heiress to the entire company. Allison took a deep breath, steeling herself for what was to come. She had no idea how things would unfold, but she knew one thing for certain. Nothing would ever be the same again. The day of reckoning arrived with a crisp autumn chill in the air. Allison stood in front of her mirror, this time dressed in a sharp, tailored suit that screamed executive rather than intern. She'd removed the fake glasses and styled her hair in elegant waves. Today, Addison Blackwood would return to Blackwood Industries, and she was ready for battle. As she entered the building, Addison nodded to the security guard who had greeted Allison every day for the past month. His eyes widened in recognition, but before he could say anything, she was already striding towards the elevator. The company-wide meeting was scheduled for 9 a.m. in the main conference room. As Addison made her way there, she could feel the tension in the air. Rumors of a major announcement had been swirling, and employees whispered nervously as they filed into the room. Marcus Holloway stood at the front, his expensive suit and slicked-back hair a stark contrast to the more modest attire of the employees. He was midway through a self-congratulatory speech about the company's record profits when Addison made her entrance. A hush fell over the room as she walked confidently to the front. Marcus faltered, his eyes widening in shock and confusion. "Excuse me," he sputtered. "This is a closed meeting. Who are you?" Addison smiled, a predatory gleam in her eye. "Oh, I think you know exactly who I am, Marcus. But for those who don't," she turned to face the assembled employees, "my name is Addison Blackwood. I'm the daughter of Gregory Blackwood, and as of this moment, I'm taking control of Blackwood Industries." The room erupted in gasps and murmurs. Addison saw Ethan in the crowd, his face a mixture of shock and dawning understanding. She felt a pang of regret for the deception, but pushed it aside. There would be time for explanations later. "This is preposterous," Marcus blustered, his face turning red. "You can't just waltz in here and—" "Actually, I can," Addison interrupted, her voice cool and steady. "As per my father's will, I have spent the last month working in this company, observing its operations from the ground up. And what I've seen has left me deeply concerned." She turned to address the room at large. "Many of you knew me as Alison Brooks, the new marketing intern. During my time here, I've witnessed firsthand the damage that's been done to this company, the company my father built with his own hands." Addison gestured to Vivian and Raj, who stood up from their seats. "With the help of some dedicated employees, I've compiled evidence of gross mismanagement, unethical practices, and decisions that have put the long-term stability of Blackwood Industries at risk." Marcus, who had been sputtering in outrage, suddenly went pale. "You can't prove anything," he hissed. "Oh, but I can," Addison replied, her voice steely. She nodded to Raj, who connected his laptop to the room's projector. Suddenly, the screen was filled with charts, emails, and financial reports, all damning evidence of Marcus's misdeeds. As the presentation unfolded, Addison could see the shock and anger spreading across the faces of the employees. Years of frustration and resentment were bubbling to the surface. "This ends now," Addison declared. "Marcus Holloway, you're fired. Effective immediately. Security will escort you from the building." As if on cue, 2 security guards entered the room. Marcus, realizing the game was up, allowed himself to be led out, but not before shooting Addison a venomous glare. "You'll regret this," he spat. Addison turned back to the stunned employees. "I know this is a lot to take in, but I want you all to know that changes are coming to Blackwood Industries, good changes. We're going back to the principles my father founded this company on. Innovation, integrity, and respect for every employee." She paused, looking out over the sea of faces. Some looked hopeful, others skeptical. Her eyes landed on Ethan, who was watching her with an unreadable expression. "I know I have a lot to prove to all of you," Addison continued. "I may be Gregory Blackwood's daughter, but I intend to earn your trust and respect. Starting today, we're going to rebuild Blackwood Industries into a company we can all be proud of." As the meeting dispersed, the room buzzed with excitement and apprehension. Addison found herself surrounded by employees, some offering congratulations, others peppered her with questions about her plans for the company. It was nearly an hour before she managed to break away. As she headed towards what was now her office, she heard a familiar voice behind her. "Addie, Ms. Blackwood?" She turned to see Ethan standing there, his expression a mixture of confusion and hurt. "Ethan," she said softly, "I owe you an explanation." He nodded, his jaw tight. "Yeah, I'd say you do." "Dinner in my office in an hour?" Addison agreed, watching him walk away with a heavy heart. She knew that rebuilding the company would be a monumental task, but in that moment, she realized that rebuilding trust with the man she'd grown to care for might be an even greater challenge. As she entered the CEO's office, her office now, Addison took a deep breath. The real work was just beginning. The months following Addison's dramatic takeover of Blackwood Industries were a whirlwind of activity. True to her word, she set about implementing sweeping changes throughout the company, determined to honor her father's legacy while steering the corporation into a new era. One of her first acts was to reinstate the budgets that Marcus had slashed, particularly in research and development. "Innovation is the lifeblood of this company," she declared in a company-wide memo. "We will not sacrifice our future for short-term gains." She also instituted a series of listening sessions, encouraging employees at all levels to share their ideas and concerns. It was during one of these sessions that Tessa, the marketing coordinator Addison had befriended during her time as an intern, suggested a radical idea. "What if we implemented a role exchange program?" Tessa proposed. Executives could spend time working in entry-level positions, and lower-level employees could shadow executives. It could foster understanding and generate new ideas. Addison's eyes lit up. "Tessa, that's brilliant. Let's make it happen." The role exchange program, as it came to be known, was met with skepticism at first. But as executives found themselves working customer service lines and entry-level employees sat in on board meetings, a new sense of camaraderie began to develop throughout the company. Addison herself participated, spending a week working in the manufacturing plant. She returned to her office with a notebook full of ideas for improving working conditions and streamlining processes. As the months turned into a year, then two, Blackwood Industries began to flourish. Product quality improved, employee satisfaction skyrocketed, and the company's reputation in the industry soared. But amidst all the professional triumphs, Addison found herself grappling with personal challenges. Her relationship with Ethan had been strained in the wake of her revelation. Though he had accepted her apology for the deception, there was a new awkwardness between them. A tension born of their changed positions within the company. It all came to a head one evening, nearly 2 years after Addison had taken control of the company. She was working late in her office when there was a knock at the door. "Come in," she called, looking up to see Ethan entering, a determined look on his face. "Addison," he said, his voice soft but firm. "We need to talk." She nodded, gesturing for him to take a seat. "I know," she replied. "Things have been complicated between us." Ethan ran a hand through his hair, a gesture Addison had come to recognize as a sign of his nervousness. "I've been doing a lot of thinking," he began. "About us, about what happened, about where we go from here." Addison felt her heart race. Was this it? Was he going to tell her that the divide between them was too great to overcome? "I was hurt," Ethan continued. "Hurt and angry that you had deceived me. But I've come to realize something." He leaned forward, his eyes meeting hers. "The woman I fell for, Alison Brooks, she was real. She was you, Addison. The compassion, the intelligence, the drive to make things better. That was all you." Addison felt tears pricking at her eyes. "Ethan, He held up a hand, stopping her. "Let me finish. I've watched you these past 2 years, Addison. I've seen how hard you've worked, how much you care about this company and everyone in it, and I've realized something else." He took a deep breath. "I'm still in love with you. CEO or intern, it doesn't matter. I love you, Addison Blackwood." For a moment, Addison sat in stunned silence. Then, with a choked laugh, she stood up and rounded the desk. Ethan rose to meet her, and as their lips met in a passionate kiss, Addison felt as though a weight had been lifted from her shoulders. As they broke apart, both breathless and smiling, Addison whispered, "I love you too, Ethan. I have for a long time." From that moment on, Addison and Ethan became a power couple within Blackwood Industries. Their relationship, built on mutual respect and a shared vision for the company, became a symbol of the new era of transparency and collaboration that Addison had ushered in. As the years passed, Blackwood Industries continued to grow and evolve. Addison implemented profit-sharing programs, ensuring that every employee had a stake in the company's success. She also launched a series of social responsibility initiatives, using the company's resources to make a positive impact in communities around the world. 5 years after taking control of the company, Addison stood on a stage at a global business conference, accepting an award for corporate ethics and innovation. As she looked out over the audience, she caught Ethan's eye. He smiled at her, his face filled with pride and love. In that moment, Addison felt a sense of fulfillment she had never known before. She had transformed her father's company, found love, and made a real difference in the world. But little did she know, the greatest adventure of her life was yet to come. 8 years had passed since Addison Blackwood had stepped into the role of CEO at Blackwood Industries. The company had become a beacon of ethical business practices and innovation in the corporate world. Addison's revolutionary management style and commitment to social responsibility had not only turned the company's fortunes around, but had also set new standards for the industry. On a warm spring morning, Addison sat in her office, overlooking the bustling city below. Her hand absently traced the elegant gold band on her ring finger, a constant reminder of her wedding to Ethan 3 years prior. Their relationship had blossomed alongside the company's success, their personal and professional lives intertwining in a harmonious balance. A knock on the door interrupted her reverie. "Come in," she called, smiling as Ethan entered, a mysterious grin playing on his lips. "Hey there, CEO," he teased, crossing the room to plant a kiss on her cheek. "Ready for our lunch date?" Addison laughed, rising from her chair. "Always. But what's with the secretive smile?" "You're up to something, Ethan Reeves." He simply shrugged, his eyes twinkling with mischief. "You'll see." As they left the Blackwood Industries building hand in hand, Addison couldn't help but marvel at how far they'd come. Ethan, once her supervisor in her undercover intern days, was now the Chief Innovation Officer, spearheading the company's cutting-edge projects. Instead of heading to their usual lunch spot, Ethan led Addison to a nearby park. As they strolled along the tree-lined path, Addison's curiosity grew. "All right, out with it," she said, nudging Ethan playfully. "What's going on?" Ethan took a deep breath, his expression softening. "Addie, do you remember when we first talked about starting a family?" Addison's heart skipped a beat. They had discussed having children, but had decided to wait until they felt the time was right. Both of them had been so focused on their careers and on solidifying Blackwood Industries' new direction. "Of course," she replied softly. "Why do you ask?" Ethan guided her to a bench overlooking a small pond. As they sat down, he pulled an envelope from his jacket pocket. "I got a call this morning," he began, his voice thick with emotion, "from the adoption agency we registered with last year." Addison's eyes widened, her hand flying to her mouth. "Ethan, are you saying—" He nodded, tears shimmering in his eyes. "They have a match for us, Addie. A little girl, she's 6 months old, and she needs a home, our home if we want it." For a moment, Addison sat in stunned silence. Then, with a joyful cry, she threw her arms around Ethan, tears streaming down her face. "Yes," she whispered fiercely. "Yes, of course we want her." As they embraced, laughing and crying together, Addison felt as though her heart might burst with happiness. This was it, the missing piece in their lives that she hadn't even realized was missing until this moment. Over the next few weeks, Addison and Ethan threw themselves into preparations for their daughter's arrival. They converted the guest room of their penthouse into a nursery, filling it with stuffed animals, colorful books, and a beautiful crib. At Blackwood Industries, the news of the impending adoption was met with an outpouring of support and excitement. Addison was touched to see how her employees, many of whom she now considered friends, rallied around her and Ethan. On a sunny day in early summer, Addison and Ethan stood in a small room at the adoption agency, their hearts racing as they waited to meet their daughter for the first time. When the social worker entered, carrying a small bundle wrapped in a pink blanket, Addison felt the world shift on its axis. As she took the baby in her arms, looking down into a pair of curious brown eyes, Addison felt a love unlike anything she had ever experienced before. "Hello, Lily," she whispered, using the name she and Ethan had chosen together. "We're your parents, and we've been waiting so long to meet you." Ethan wrapped his arms around them both, forming a cocoon of love around their new family. In that moment, Addison knew that no business success, no corporate award, could ever compare to the joy she felt holding her daughter. In the months that followed, Addison and Ethan navigated the challenges and joys of new parenthood. Addison implemented new family-friendly policies at Blackwood Industries, including extended parental leave and on-site childcare facilities. She was determined to make the company a place where employees could thrive, both professionally and personally. One evening, as Addison stood in the nursery, watching Lily sleep peacefully in her crib, she found herself reflecting on the journey that had brought her to this point, from reluctant heiress to visionary leader, and now to mother. Each role had shaped her, challenged her, and ultimately fulfilled her in ways she never could have imagined. She thought of her father, wishing he could have lived to see the woman she had become, the company she had built, the family she had created. Somehow she felt certain he would have been proud. As Ethan joined her, wrapping an arm around her waist, Addison leaned into him with a contented sigh. "What are you thinking about?" he asked softly, careful not to wake Lily. Addison smiled, her eyes never leaving their sleeping daughter. "I'm thinking about legacy," she replied, "about how my father's last request, as frustrating as it seemed at the time, led me to you, to this company, to our beautiful daughter. I'm thinking about the future we're building, not just for Blackwood Industries, but for Lily, and for all the families that depend on us." Ethan pressed a kiss to her temple. "You've created something extraordinary, Addie. A company that cares, a family filled with love. Your father would be so proud." As they stood there watching over their sleeping child, Addison felt a profound sense of peace wash over her. She had honored her father's legacy by creating a company that was not only financially successful, but also had a positive impact on society. And now, with Ethan by her side and Lily in their lives, she was building a legacy of her own, one of love, compassion, and unwavering commitment to making the world a better place. The journey hadn't always been easy, but as Addison looked at her husband and their beautiful daughter, she knew without a doubt that every challenge, every obstacle, had been worth it. This was her happily ever after, not an ending, but the beginning of a new and exciting chapter in the story of Addison Blackwood and the legacy she was creating. As she and Ethan quietly left the nursery hand in hand, Addison felt a renewed sense of purpose. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new opportunities to make a difference, and she was ready to face them all, with her family by her side and the strength of her convictions guiding her way. In the soft glow of the nightlight, little Lily slept on, unaware of the incredible journey that had brought her parents together, or of the bright future that lay ahead. But as she grew, she would come to know the story of her mother's courage, her father's steadfastness, and the power of love to transform not just a company, but the lives of all those it touched. And so, the legacy of Blackwood Industries continued, not just in boardrooms and balance sheets, but in the hearts of a family that had found each other against all odds, and in the countless lives they would go on to touch and improve in the years to come.